How can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that?
Hi again, everyone. I'm Abrego Garcia in for Nicole Wallace. We're coming up on 5 o'clock here in New York. Just a few weeks ago, that's what we heard from Donald Trump. A total abdication of responsibility for the man wrongly deported to El Salvador, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, saying that it was all up to the Salvadoran government to release him. Yet now, in a new interview with ABC News marking his 100 days in office, Trump is singing a different tune.
You came into our country illegally.
You could get him back. There's a phone on this desk.
I could.
You could pick it up, and with all the power of the presidency, you could call up the president of El Salvador and say, send him back right now.
And if he were the gentleman that you say he is, I would do that.
But the court has ordered you to facilitate that.
I'm not the one making this decision. We have lawyers that don't want to do this.
But the buck stops in this office.
No. I follow the law. You want me to follow the law? If I were the president that just wanted to do anything, I'd probably keep him right where he is.
Supreme Court says what the law is.
That's a remarkable admission there, that he could get Abrego Garcia back, but he won't. And then he blamed it all on his lawyers. As the New York Times described it, quote, Mr. Trump's comments not only undermined previous statements by his top aides, but were a blunt sign of his administration's intention to double down and defy the courts. The judge handling this case, Judge Paula Zenas, this morning ordered a slew of new deadlines over the next 2 weeks for discovery in the case. She did so after denying a new motion from the Trump administration that had requested to further delay discovery. Meanwhile, a second judge today strongly rebuked the Trump administration in another high-profile immigration case, that of Mohsen Madawi, a Columbia University student, green card holder, who's been held in an ICE facility in Vermont after he was arrested earlier this month during an appointment for his process of becoming a U.S. citizen. Today, Judge Jeffrey Crawford ordered Madawi's release on bail with some harsh language for the Trump administration, drawing parallels of Trump's broader crackdown on immigration to the Red Scare and McCarthyism. Outside the courthouse after his release, Madawi spoke out against the administration.
And I am saying it clear and loud.
Yes.
To President Trump and his cabinet.
Yes.
I am not afraid of you. For anybody who's doubting justice, this is a light of hope, a hope and faith in the justice system in America. What we are witnessing now and what we're understanding is exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King have said before. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
And that is where we start this hour with staff writer for The Atlantic, Nick Miroff. His focus is on immigration. Also with us is immigration attorney and former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Alan Orr. And here with me at the table, New York Times editorial board member and MSNBC political analyst, Mara Gay. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us. Mara, let's just talk about that for a second. I certainly, if I were on a visa and I had been thrown into a detention facility under threat of being deported, it's hard to come up with the I'm not afraid of you, but that's an interesting message that he came out and told the administration he believes justice will prevail.
It's not only an interesting message, it's a message that holds a lot of power and resonance and sets an example for some of our institutions that have failed to stand up to Donald Trump. What we see with dictators and authoritarians around the world, and what we've seen here within, even the past 100 years within the United States, especially in the Jim Crow South, is that you actually have to stand up to dictatorship and authoritarianism. And when you don't do that, when you start to strike deals, as some law firms have or some universities have, the authoritarian never stops there.
Right.
And so that's why the example of Harvard University is so powerful, the example of media organizations that are refusing to get rid of their independence and they're holding fast to it is so important. And that's why we're seeing courage from individuals like this, which is especially stunning because these are
they're vulnerable.
Vulnerable people. These are, not U.S. citizens. They are non-white humans in the world, and that's a difficult thing right now when faced with the Trump administration and its agenda. And so I think it's an example, and it allows others to say, you know what, yes, together, because of course people can't do that on their own, if people stand together, Donald Trump and Trumpism is not, it's not infallible. And I think the courts are playing the key role here, which is to say, no, Donald Trump is not a king. He may want to be, but as long as the courts keep doing what they are doing, which is to allow the wheels of justice to turn, Donald Trump will look more and more isolated in his behavior as someone who is not acting as a president should in the United States of America, but is acting as a would-be dictator.
Alan, let me ask you about this as an immigration attorney, because there are so many moving pieces to this. Whether you're Mohsen Madawi or you're Abrego Garcia, you have rights. Donald Trump is trying to paint a picture in which American citizens have rights and nobody else in this country has rights. People have rights, and they have rights to due process. And if the government feels that someone is an actual threat, not a perceived threat or a dissenter, they have an ability to prove that in the court. And generally speaking, the American government doesn't win against you if that's true. What's going on here? It's just unusual to watch that the government is doing things that don't seem to be legal.
Right. So I think we need to go back to the Constitution, because the Constitution determines what all of these branches are supposed to be doing and not doing. And we yesterday had a posting from UCIS on all social media basically saying that if you're a green card holder, then you're a visitor, which sort of speaks to Mr. Malawi, which if you're a green card holder, you're a permanent resident, and that's far less than just a visitor in the United States. That's someone who's been here for a very long time and who's done considerable things to sort of get that green card. But with Mr. Garcia, let's sort of set the table that we're looking at, the chessboard, right? First, you go back and you pull this Aliens Act from a very dark time in our country, not even within centuries of where we are right now. Then the court, not saying that's appropriate because it's not a wartime act, there was, so questionable about that. Then there was an injunction about the planes leaving. So if you would have stopped the planes, you wouldn't have all these individual cases. And then on the third level of play right here, it was the Trump administration that granted him the ability to remain in the United States. And it's that same administration that went back and violated their own rules. Because if he wanted to deport him, he could have deported him because there's a process for it where you get due process. No one in the immigration field is saying you cannot do deportations. You just have to go through the correct process. And that's what the president is refusing to do in all these cases. So with Mr. Garcia, it seems very political. And against all of these students who have been here for a very long time, it's super political and hurting our economic background, because those foreign students bring $43 billion a year to this economy.
And Nick, this is interesting, because the argument specifically with respect to the students, let's put it beside Abrego Garcia for a second. The argument with the students is that they are essentially they're dissenters. They have views that are not aligned, and same thing with the universities. They have views that are not aligned with that of the administration, which is wholly inconsistent with what our founding fathers did and what the Constitution of this country holds.
Well, that's why we've seen the administration rely on this very obscure provision in the Immigration and Nationality Act that basically affords the Secretary of State this extraordinary ability to determine that someone, even if they're a legal permanent resident, that their presence here is somehow, detrimental to the foreign policy interests of the United States. So they're really reaching, deep into the recesses of the law to try to use these authorities, get these students out, but they're not winning in court, and their record so far has not been a good one.
That thing that Nick is talking about, this obscure thing that the Secretary of State can do, it talks about the fact that you might say or do something in the future that's contrary to the objectives, the foreign policy objectives of the United States. It's weird. They don't even feel the need to necessarily prove that you're a threat. We've seen them try, right, but they seem to be trying. This administration seems to be trying more in the court of public opinion than they are in court.
Well, first of all, what they're doing is they're looking into, the reason this is an obscure law, the 1798 law, is that no other president has tried to use it, because essentially it's so arcane that the belief for generations has been that there is nothing in the spirit of our modern democracy to back it up.
Right.
And there are a lot of obscure laws in not only the U.S. Constitution, but in state constitutions across the country that are no longer in use, in common use. And this is why. So this is cherry picking, and it's all part of this unitary executive theory, right, I believe, which really holds that the president, they're not three co-equal branches, but that the president really determines the law. And anyone, again, who has watched Schoolhouse Rock knows that that's not actually what we have agreed upon in this modern democracy. So there are a lot of obscure laws that any of us might choose, if convenient for us, to draw upon. That doesn't actually mean that they should be functional. And so I think that will be, they are testing the courts. And the Donald Trump, the Trump administration has every right to test the courts, but it doesn't mean that it is appropriate.
Right.
It's not appropriate, and it's going to be up to the courts to set that boundary. And the scary thing is that Donald Trump is defying court orders, and he's now arguing over language. So this language about facilitating release of detainees who never should have been deported to begin with, that is where I am the most concerned, because now essentially Trump is daring the Supreme Court to say, tell me what you really mean.
Well, that was a weird, Alan, that was a really weird moment where Donald Trump is saying, I don't have power to get this guy back. We have people who are held hostage by governments all around the world, and we put our back into trying to get them out. He's saying, I can't get it out. The El Salvadoran president is saying, I can't give this guy back, which of course it's a grift, right? The El Salvadorians, credit to them, are making a lot of money off of having these prisons and having Americans sent there. Although there's talk that the El Salvadoran president is also a little concerned about whether we're sending them people that we shouldn't be sending. Help me make sense of this.
So there is not a clear way to make sense of this other than to say that the legal process is slower than the rectification that justice in America is sort of calling for, something immediate rectification. The other panelists said that they were winning, but they're winning in immigration court. And immigration court is part of the Department of Justice. So that's why Mr. Malawi was released today, because he was in a federal court between a different article judge to get that relief. And so there'll be a lot of considerations about that and what Congress can do. With regards to this conversation about can you get them back and if there's a rule, we're out of the legal perspective and into the political perspective. Because sure, we could take this back to the Supreme Court to say, define this. The Supreme Court should have been stronger in the ruling. And there were two opinions that went with it to sort of say, this is what you needed to do. But let's remove the president out of the question. Let's say he has immunity for these things that he's doing. Pam Bundy does not, and she's an officer of the court. And if it's clear to everyone else that it was 9-0 that they should do this, and she's choosing not to do it, she's not meeting the candor to the court that is needed. So there's some concern for me with regards to choices that the Department of Justice is making for people who are members of state bars.
Nick, I want to play a little bit more of that interview that Donald Trump gave to ABC last night, because they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. And Donald Trump had posted a picture on Truth Social of Abrego Garcia with MS-13 tattooed on his knuckles. Let's listen to this exchange.
Even the man that you picked to you, Terry, but you're not being very nice.
Let's just put aside for a moment the you're not being very nice and I picked you and all that sort of dictatorial language. What's worse, that the president showed a photoshopped image of a guy that didn't have MS-13 on his knuckles, or that the president found out in an interview last night that it was a Photoshop picture? I mean, this is the guy with access to the nuclear codes. I don't even know which one I'm more worried about.
I mean, it's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary scene, and credit to Terry Moran for persisting there. I don't know what to say. Has no one really told him the truth about that photo? Who gave him the photo? I mean, it's just incredible to see him continue to insist that something that is patently not true, is what was on the screen. So, whether or not those tattoos signify what the president says, I don't know, but they clearly do not. His knuckles do not say MS-13 as he claims.
Mara, Judge Jeffrey Crawford today compared what's going on to McCarthyism. He said the court also considers the extraordinary setting of this case and others like it. Legal residents not charged with crimes or misconduct are being arrested and threatened with deportation for stating their views on the political issues of the day. Our nation has seen times like this before, especially during the Red Scare and the Palmer raids of 1919 to 1920 that led to the deportation of hundreds of people suspected of anarchist or communist views. Similar themes were sounded during the McCarthy period in the 1950s, when thousands of non-citizens were targeted for deportation due to their political views.
Well, what the students are going through on American soil and American universities is just such a violation of the spirit of this country and the democracy that we are in, and the First Amendment. I also believe it's really dangerous not only for visa holders who are on college campuses, but for their classmates who are U.S. citizens, I think it sends a chilling effect. So maybe a U.S. citizen, a student at one of these universities right now, maybe that person is a U.S. citizen, but maybe they're wondering, if I say something, if I join a protest, if I write a campus column, I used to have a column at the University of Michigan, maybe I won't get hired anymore. Maybe I have to worry about a spouse who is a visa holder. And that is the McCarthy effect that is chilling, and it has a chilling effect on free speech and on freedom of thought. And what's happening to the visa holders is also extremely wrong. It's a violation of universities as well, which, by the way, are bastions of resistance.
And dissent and argument and debate. That's what they're there for.
They're not, safe spaces for snowflakes, as Trump wants to present them. Actually, they are deeply threatening to authoritarian rule. And so as Donald Trump tries to consolidate power, we can expect these kind of attacks. But I just want to be clear that the attacks on the visa holders and these students, they are wrong. But they are not the only ones under attack here. And so this is just a full-on assault on the independence of universities, of the faculty, of students, and of the ability of universities to contribute to public life, including through research and science. So this is extremely disturbing, and I think it's important as we have these conversations that we try and think about these visa holders as part of the community.
Right.
And
they're just they're proxy for speech.
Foreigners.
Yeah. The issue is dissent. The issue is speech. The issue is our freedoms, not that they have a visa.
They're just first in line.
They're just first in line. That's exactly right. All right, nobody's going anywhere. When we return, outrage over what may be the most egregious act the Trump administration has taken yet. Now a family, all American citizens, say they're traumatized for life after ICE pulled them from their home, seized their life savings in a violent and humiliating raid. That story's next.
100 days in, if anything is clear, it's that, yes, some of what they're doing is intentional, including the cruelty, but a lot of it is just them screwing up, just them being completely slipshod and shambolic and incompetent in ways that ruin people's lives.
In ways that ruin people's lives. That's my colleague Rachel Maddow on the overwhelming evidence that the horror of Donald Trump's mass deportation efforts is spreading. From people being stripped of their legal residency for exercising their right to free speech and protest, to the news of children who are U.S. citizens being removed from the country. And now a family in Oklahoma says they were raided in the early hours of the morning by ICE agents who took their phones, their laptops, and their money. Here's what the mother told local news. Her face was obscured to protect her identity.
I keep asking them, who are you? What are you doing here? What's happening? And they said, we have a warrant for the house. That's what I kept saying. We're citizens.
She says they didn't care.
We weren't criminals. Why were they treating us like criminals? We were here by ourselves, that we didn't do anything. We have guns pointed at our faces. Can you just reprogram yourself and see us as humans, as women, a little bit of mercy, and care a little bit about your fellow human mate, about your fellow citizen, fellow resident. We bleed too. We bleed just like anybody else bleeds. We were scared. You could see in our faces that we were terrified.
When asked for comment, DHS did not address the terror the family experienced or the fact that their belongings and life savings were confiscated with no information given to them on how to retrieve them. Quote, ICE was carrying out a court-authorized search warrant. The previous residents were the intended targets, end quote. We're back with Nick, Alan, and Mara. Alan, let me just ask you about that. The inhumanity of the whole thing, whether the previous residents were targeted, whether there was an undocumented immigrant living in, it's mind-boggling that they did this, setting aside the fact that the people who got apprehended were actually American citizens.
Right. So I think the first thing we should start with, this is a good federal torts claim, and she should have a lawyer as soon as possible. Just this week, the Supreme Court heard a case just similar to this, where the FBI broke into a home in Atlanta, Georgia, broke down the door and assaulted people. The thing that's in common about these stories is that it's always a black or brown person who's at the other end of these incidences. Because there was many times in which the officers could have made a different decision about how they carried out these acts based on their constitutional amendment. So even not knowing that you're going to take 20 people to a home to raid it and not sure who lives in the home is problematic to me with the expenses that the government's putting into this. But these things will operate around some citizens, and those citizens will look like me, like you, and like brown immigrants in the United States who will have to once again justify and prove that they're citizens because she clearly provided documents. Not only was the house raided, they removed the woman and the child into the yard in the rain in their underwear. That is unacceptable and undignified in every other type of arrest I've ever seen. And while at the same time we're telling to United States citizens, please have more kids, we're removing kids from the United States who are U.S. citizens. Does not make a lot of sense to me, but only unless you're saying you only want a certain type of kid.
You know, where are the congressional oversight hearings right now on how ICE and the FBI are operating on the streets of the United States of America? Because this is the kind of example where we cannot know right now if something similar is happening. Today, right now, there are other cases that suggest that there are American citizens who have already been deported, some of them children, wrongfully. And there's no due process for them. We have a lot of conversations, and we have for a long time, about the way local police departments conduct themselves. They are forced to wear body cams. That's a good thing. That's great. But where is the oversight? We have no insight as American citizens right now to the way that these agencies have been weaponized or are being used under Donald Trump. We don't know. Some officers may be conducting themselves according to the law. Some may not. And who is holding them accountable? And just the example that we heard from these American citizens, from this woman that we just heard, it's hurtful to listen to. It's hard to listen to. Suggests that there are officers on the ground right now who are acting with impunity, who are armed, and they are taking that case to human beings, including American citizens. This should be alarming to members of Congress, Republicans included, where the oversight hearings should start tomorrow.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
Yeah. That's right.
Nick, when we played earlier some sound of in the White House, President Trump with President Bukele of El Salvador, and President Trump, when responding to a reporter, kept insisting, "Why don't you just thank us for getting these people out of the country?" The reporter was asking about the process. The reporter was asking about the fact that the courts had told the president that he's got to, get or at least deal with Abrego Garcia. It's remarkable that the answer by the President of the United States to a reporter is, why are you just not thankful that we're getting rid of these people?
Yeah, well, he expects appreciation, and he also is challenging, some of these sentiments by claiming that it's impossible to give what he calls trials to all the, millions of undocumented immigrants in the United States. But as many people have pointed out, these aren't trials. People are not expecting, jury trials for every single individual case. What this is about are, simple hearings and oversights, and just, someone, neutral who can look at the claims of law enforcement agencies to make sure that mistakes weren't made, to make sure that there's actual evidence behind some of the charges that they're leveling at people as they're calling them terrorists, and not only deporting them. One thing to deport someone from the United States, it's another thing to send them to a foreign prison with no potential chance to get out.
So, Alan, this is an interesting question. What's the bigger issue here? The lack, as Mara said, the lack of oversight, the fact that these people are working with impunity, or as Nick said, if you have the evidence that this person is an actual danger or threat or a terrorist or whatever, why not just take it to the court? It's not actually a full-out jury trial. The government usually wins these cases.
Yeah, so I think it's both. And I think for me, for justice is equally as important. I went to school and I had an understanding that we would rather let one person go free that was guilty than put someone in jail that is actually innocent. And that's the problem, that we've sort of changed due process altogether and sort of thinking about the right process to carry these things through. And so we need the Congress to stand up and say what needs to happen. Judiciary will catch up, but it will take some time, and that's part of the problem here. But in this moment where we're throwing money and expenses at saying we're enforcing things, there was an alarming thing that the border's under control. Well, I hope it is for the amount of money. There's 16 officers to each one individual that tries to cross the border. So congratulations, if that's success, then that's what it is. But more than that, when you start to remove and say that we're all Americans, and you start treating a certain cohort, because when we see these deportation flights, we don't see many of them going to Europe right now. What we're seeing are a lot of perp walks on the lawn of the White House. All those people who were arrested, who were not convicted, were all people who were black and brown. So we are redefining who this nation is, and that's the challenge in immigration, because it's the one thing that made us so strong. And the Constitution is what leveled the playing field. So if you want to say they're criminals, go through the process and prove that they're criminal. You are upset that someone is giving you a trope and saying you're deportable, but you're fine going on television and saying every immigrant is a criminal, illegal alien. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's inconsistent.
But we're making it, Mara, we're making it, I mean, the DHS Secretary, Kristi Noem, is cosplaying as an ICE agent and posing with these deportees. So there's a thing going on here. I think you can get Americans to come along and say, hey, we should probably know our border policies and we should probably enforce them. But this is a different thing. We're really just painting everybody who might possibly be some kind of immigrant as a danger.
Well, that is part of the process of dehumanizing groups of people within authoritarianism, so that you can make it easier to consolidate power and to act on your enemies. And I use that language, which is strong language, because I think we don't want to live in an ahistorical world where this is the kind of behavior that the world has never seen before.
We've seen it several times.
We've seen it many times, sadly, around the world. I think it's shocking, and it should shock us. It should shock our consciences. It should move us to act, because we live proudly in what has been the world's brightest modern democracy, at least for the past half century.
Right.
And so, yes, it is totally aberrant with our style of the rule of law and democracy. But unfortunately, it is now consistent. So we have to try and find a way to move beyond that shock and to start asking our institutions to do more than what they would ordinarily do to hold this man accountable.
And to be courageous and to be brave. And I will say this, I want to close up with this. It's not all gloom. We are seeing courage, and courage is as contagious as cowardice. For a little while there, it was looking like cowardice was the thing, but we're seeing courage. Thanks to all of you. I really appreciate it. Nick, Alan, and Mara's going to stick around. So thanks to the two of you.